So I'm Michelle Curran, call sign Mace. You can see on my fancy helmet that I brought with me. I am a former F-16 fighter pilot and former lead solo for the Thunderbirds. I did 13 years on active duty in the Air Force, and now I'm an entrepreneur. So while I was on the Thunderbirds, people generally assumed that I had been one of those kids at an air show watching the demo and being like, I'm gonna go do that someday. But it was a lot later for me. I grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, not a military family, not an aviation family, so I just didn't have exposure to those things. I was always adventurous and a thrill seeker and really driven. And so in high school, my parents encouraged me to look at scholarship opportunities since I had good grades and they didn't have a college fund. And eventually Air Force ROTC kind of filtered to the top. But what I think is unexpected for people to learn is that I was a criminal justice major because I wanted to go be an FBI agent. So my plan was to have the Air Force pay for my education, do 4 years as an OSI agent, special investigations, and then I would have fulfilled the FBI's desire for a military experience, a criminal justice degree. I would go do that. Great plan, laid out as a 17-year-old. And then about halfway through ROTC, I visited Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, and I saw my first fighter jet up close. I saw 2 F-15s take off in full afterburner at dusk from the ramp. So you get the orange flame coming out the back, the jet noise vibrates your whole body. It's like, forget the FBI, I want to go do that. There was a couple points where I hit some friction for sure. I went into IFS with 0 flight time, no civilian hours. I knew nothing about airplanes. I didn't understand the mechanics of the aircraft. I was learning everything from how to talk on the radio to how navigation works to how an oil system works. And I think a lot of my peers had their PPLs, or at least some flight hours. Many of them were engineering degrees, and so they took very naturally to the systems of the aircraft. It felt like a completely foreign language for me. And so there were a few days early in that program where I was up until midnight just trying to cram all this information, knowing I did not know enough of it. Did pretty well in pilot training. I really enjoyed it. I naturally took to flying pretty quickly, was able to get an F-16 out of there, which was my first choice. I think one of the coolest things I got to do was, as a solo pilot, I had specific single aircraft maneuvers that I did. And by far my favorite was vertical rolls. And for anyone that's seen the Thunderbird air show, it's where the solo pilot comes in super low, does that 90-degree turn, and then spirals up. And to give you a perspective on that, I couldn't break the Mach. That's a rule by the FAA, right? At air shows, especially, you're 100 feet off the ground. So I'm 100 feet off the ground in front of a crowd at 0.95 Mach usually. So we're over 600 miles an hour. And then I would pull about 8 Gs in that turn and then point straight up and spiral up to 15,000 feet from 100 feet. And I've never timed it exactly. You would peg out the VVI, so I don't even know what it was. But I think I could look at a video that I have, and I think it was under 20 seconds. So it's a quick, for the whole maneuver, not just the climb. So it's a quick climb rate that I think you only really experience if you're, blasting off to space, other than in a fighter jet. That kind of intimidation factor can be there because whether it's true or not, and unfortunately it still is true many times, you feel like you have to prove yourself more than the person sitting next to you when you are a minority by far in an industry. And I've heard that, I know only as far as Air Force fighter pilots, there's only about 3% that are women, so we're a very small portion. But even in general aviation and commercial aviation, many of the women I've talked to, even if they're not the only female pilot in their industry, they still are facing things where assumptions are made about them. People assume they're flight attendants all the time, which is not intentional, but that gets old when it happens day in, day out, right? I know one thing that I struggled with is feeling like I had the responsibility of setting what was acceptable in the squadron culturally, and that whatever I decided was going to shape the culture that the next woman in my footsteps stepped into. Then I also felt like I was setting the reputation for all female pilots. So if I didn't do well at one specific thing, one mission, one skill, whatever, now suddenly the assumption is all female pilots are terrible at insert whatever it is, landings, or in the F-16 air-to-air or whatever it is. So I made a big pivot about a year ago, almost exactly. So happy 1-year anniversary to me of being an entrepreneur. I decided while I was on the Thunderbirds that I wanted to leave active duty for various reasons. I met my husband at the beginning of that assignment. I have a stepson now. I didn't want to be moving around every 3 years anymore. The F-16 pulling 9Gs, while cool, is hard on your body. And so I started to look at options, and kind of the natural transition would be to go fly for the airlines. Obviously hiring like crazy right now. But the more I thought about that, I kind of realized that I was in a unique spot coming off of 3 years as a Thunderbird. And with social media being where it's at and the GoPros being where they were at technology-wise and filming in the cockpit, I just started putting all this cockpit footage online with really no goal other than to just allow people a little peek behind the curtain. And it really took off. It gained a lot of traction. And a byproduct of that is that it gave me a platform where I could really inspire a lot of people and I could interact with them directly. And I would get messages all the time from girls and young women asking the question you just asked, like, I want to be a pilot. How do I do that? I'm insecure about this. I'm worried about this. Like, give me some advice. And I started to do that early on 2019, my first year on the team. And by 2021, my last season with the team, those people were starting to circle back and share their successes. And it was the most rewarding thing I had ever experienced. And so that kind of planted a seed for me that there might be an opportunity to do that on the outside as a full-time job. I just had to figure out what that looked like. And so starting my company, Upside Down Dreams, I have a children's book coming out by the same name in June. So it's about a little girl that wants to be a fighter pilot. And I also am a keynote speaker. That's kind of my full-time gig, usually to corporate audiences, but occasionally I get to do it at things like Oshkosh, the Women Venture Lunch. I'm keynoting that, various schools and aviation-focused events, which is really cool. So I kind of get the twofold with the children's book, tying me back to the interactions I got to have with little kids while I was a Thunderbird, which was just so much fun. And then kind of the adult audience with the corporate events and seeing that affect people's career decisions and life decisions and kind of push them to go after hard, scary things has been the most rewarding thing. And I honestly love that part of the mission from when I was a Thunderbird so much that I don't miss the flying, which people have a hard time accepting. But I mean, it's intense flying. It's hard on your body, like I said. And so to take what became my favorite part of the job, being able to change people's lives in a positive way and keep doing it, has been awesome.